Distress inks can create a soft, muted background, and by adding a little gold embossing powder underneath, you can create a background that will remind you of springtime in Paris. Let me show you the tools and products you're going to need to do this technique. First, you're going to need some distress inks, and the ones that I'm using today are the Bundled Sage, the Aged Mahogany, and the Victorian Velvet. You're also going to need some embossing ink, and I'm using my Versamark pad for that. You're going to need embossing powder, and I've chosen the Ranger Superfine Detail Embossing Powder in gold. And then you're going to need some sort of sponge or applicator for your ink, and I'm using these foam applicator tools by Ranger. I'm also going to use an anti-static pad to remove any static or oils from my piece of cardstock. I'm using some of the Gina Designs Pure Luxury Heavy Base Weight White cardstock as my base cardstock, and a line art image, and I'm using the floral image from the Scent with Love Stamp TV kit. To begin, you're going to use your anti-static pad and rub it lightly over the cardstock to remove any oils or any debris or any kind of static on your piece of cardstock. Then, using the Versamark ink, I'm going to ink up this line art floral image. And I really like these very delicate images for these background techniques because it gives just a little bit of shimmer in and among all of that beautiful, rich color ink. Okay, so I'm going to start this right in the center. And then, once I've stamped my first impression, and of course you can't really see that very well on the camera, but I'm going to kind of go around the outside now. Now, in real life, you'll be able to see the watermark. It's very light, but you will be able to see it. I'll put one there. One here. Turn my cardstock a little bit. I'll put one here. And my final one will go right in this corner. Right here. Okay. Now, I know that doesn't look like anything now, but when I get the embossing powder on there, you'll see. Now, I'm using just a half sheet of cardstock folded in half, and that will contain my embossing powder, so it makes it easy to get it back in the jar. All right. And as you can see, now my pattern is starting to emerge as I sprinkle the embossing powder on top. There you go. I'm going to blow off the excess. There we go. I'll put that aside for a second. Let me get rid of this embossing powder. It does help to start with that piece of cardstock. Now back to my project here. I'm going to use my Marvy heat tool, and I'm going to emboss these delicate flowers. And because the lines are so fine, you don't need to hold the tool on too long. Once you see it change to a shiny color, you know it's done. And now you can see it's starting to get shiny. Once the heat tool heats up a little bit, it goes a lot faster. Makes it easier to emboss. So if you're doing quite a few of these, just the first one will take a little while. Then you'll really start to see them come up quickly. You can see the area there that I embossed is all shiny already, where the other area isn't. That's what it's supposed to look like. Now, remember, embossing powder is hot, so I just flip it over to do the other side. And almost done. Now this is actually a very, very pretty, elegant background all by itself. And if you have white embossing powder, you should try embossing the white on white and see how pretty that looks. Perfect backdrop for a wedding card. Okay. So now I want to give this just a minute to cool, because if the embossing powder is hot, it will smear if you rub your finger over it or rub a sponge over it. In the meantime, I'm going to get my distress inks ready. I'm going to start with my lightest color here, and that is the Victorian Velvet. Let me just feel that. Yep, that feels plenty cool enough. And I'm just going to rub my foam applicator tool over the surface of the ink pad and get it nice and inky. And then using a delicate circular motion, I'm going to create color. I'm going to add color on top of this embossing. Now remember, embossing, the gold embossing will not, it won't grab any ink, it won't change color or anything like that. You'll be able to wipe any ink from on top of the embossing powder once it's embossed. So there I've created that pretty muted pink bottom layer. And now I'm going to go back over it with a little bit of aged mahogany. Now this is a deeper color, so I'm just going to add a little bit here and there. Kind of go maybe in like a V pattern across, but not so much a V that you can see it, just so that it just kind of swirls some color in. You'll see what I mean here. And then kind of go around the edge a little bit. There, like that. Okay, so now I've added that. And for my last color, I'm going to use some of the bundled sage. And what I love about the distress inks is, even though you're using colors that normally mixed together would almost turn brown, the distress inks seem to have such nice pigment in them that the colors really still show through even when they're blending together. And a little bit of that green in there. Kind of going over some of those lighter areas where I had some of the softer pink. And this just makes the whole thing look a little bit more distressed and a little bit aged. Really softens it up. And it mutes some of that aged mahogany from being almost a little bit too red. Isn't that pretty? And for my final step, I'm going to take a piece of paper towel and I'm just going to rub lightly over all of that embossing to remove any ink that might be sitting on top of the embossed images and kind of making it a little bit dull. You can see that ink is coming off. And here you can see a close-up view of that. Isn't that pretty? You can almost see the texture that that embossing powder creates, and then when you mix those colors together, how nicely distressed it looks. Now let me show you my finished project. Here I've used that same background technique, and then I've stamped the bench image in Versamark and also embossed that in gold, and did the same thing with the greeting, and then I added 2 little copper brads on the side and just colored that in with a little bit of marker. You can also use watercolors to do that, or colored pencils. Isn't that pretty? And that little piece of white ribbon with the gold lines just kind of brings it all together. For a bolder look, try white or brightly colored embossing powders and vibrant distress inks, or keep it soft and elegant with fine line art images, sparkly metallic embossing powders, and soft muted inks.